Hello, and welcome everyone to the public newsroom. Nice to see some familiar and some new faces. If you're here for the first time, welcome. It's nice to meet you. If you're returning to the public newsroom, it's great to see you again. My name is Ellie, and I'll be your facilitator slash MC slash host this evening. Before we get started tonight, I would just like to share a couple housekeeping items to make sure that everyone feels good about navigating Zoom. So if you would like to view closed captions while we speak, you can go ahead and hit the CC button on the bottom of your Zoom window. Or if you are tuning in from Facebook Live, hello, you can click the gear icon at the bottom of the video to turn captions on. If you are joining us on Zoom, please go ahead and open up the agenda that we emailed you. It's also linked in the chat. There's a couple icebreaker questions in there. If you're feeling friendly, feel free to drop answers. There's also a couple notes about Zoom etiquette and troubleshooting. So if you're having any technical issues, feel free to read through those. I also want to shout out that Pat Sire is in the Zoom doing all of our technical troubleshooting. So if you've got any questions, feel free to drop a question in the chat. He'll help you out. And lastly, if you are here because you're looking for Spanish language information on housing, that session is tomorrow at 6 p.m. Same time, just on Facebook Live. So it'll be facebook.com/citybureau. We are partnering with Univision on that forum. So just a heads up, if you are looking for this info in Spanish, that's tomorrow, not tonight. All right, so now that that is out of the way, we can get started for real. Welcome again. Like I said, my name is Ellie Mejia and I run the public newsroom, our monthly digital workshop series where we discuss and deconstruct local issues. The public newsroom is a program by City Bureau. If you don't know us, City Bureau is a nonprofit media organization that aims to serve the South and West sides of Chicago. And we know that it can be challenging to find accurate, up-to-date, and relevant information about housing, especially during this pandemic. And that's why tonight we've brought together 3 guests with expertise ranging from the legal side of things to organizing to an actual city official to answer all of your housing-related questions. We're joined today by Michelle Gilbert of the Lawyers Committee for Better Housing, Aaron Johnson of the Chicago Department of Housing, and Casey Woods of the Chicago Tenants Movement. Each of our guests will present for about 10 minutes each to go over some common issues that tenants face and to give you a sense of the kind of information and resources that they can offer you so that when we go into the Q&A, that'll be at around 6:45, you know who you can direct your questions to. We will hold questions until then, but if you do have a question come up during the presentation, feel free to leave it in the chat and we'll start to queue them up. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that also joining us today is Justin Agrello, who co-planned this event with me and led the City Bureau reporting team that put together a whole series on Chicago's housing crisis. If you haven't read that yet, I strongly encourage you to do so. It highlights stories of Chicago renters and also offers resources for tenants. You can find that at citybureau.org/housing. And for the Spanish language version, you can go to the Chicago Univision website. So to start us off, I will pass it to Justin to just say a couple words about his reporting and how it inspired tonight's event.
So thank you, Ellie. So again, my name is Justin Agrello. I'm a civic reporting resident here at City Bureau. And since last March, I've been covering the impacts of COVID-19 on people's housing and really how it's worsened Chicago's ongoing eviction crisis. So like Ellie said, we published a package of stories, and really the big story in there was one where we called the Housing Cliff, where we spoke with about 30 tenants who were facing eviction or displacement during the pandemic. And I think at the time, a lot of the conversation around what the media was calling like the eviction avalanche was really centered a lot of experts and researchers. So I think what we really wanted to do with that story was similarly to what we're doing today, is just offer, folks closest to the issue a space to share as much or as little as they wanted. And to really just sort of like highlight that this problem is not like an individual failure. This is sort of a systemic failure on part of our city and the country, really. And tonight really grew out of that reporting in a lot of ways. As City Bureau's housing team was talking with a lot of renters over the course of this year, we really realized that folks were in need of relevant housing information. I think there was a lot of confusions around the eviction moratorium. Like a year ago, that was sort of like a foreign concept to me. So I can imagine others. And I also think like the support from like government agencies, nonprofits, legal aids, mutual aid sort of created a little bit of a maze, if you will, and caused some confusion and for folks that we spoke with, not really knowing where to turn to or like how to navigate this crisis, maybe. So we really wanted today to sort of, today to be a space where we could really be in conversation with one another, but also like maybe point some folks in the right direction so that they can get like the support that they need. I think my time at City Bureau is coming to an end. So if you come looking for me post Friday, I will be gone, sadly. But I think my time here has really shifted my idea of like the role that journalists can and maybe should play in times of crisis. I don't think it's always helpful to repeat people's problems back to them. I think, journalists can really provide some information that people need to better navigate the world around them, especially in times of crisis. And I really hope that tonight is that for some of you. So I'll get off my soapbox and I'll pass it back to Ellie. But thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Justin. We will, with those wise words, we'll go ahead and start the presentation. So first up is Michelle Gilbert, again, from Lawyers Committee for Better Housing. Bear with me for 1 second, folks, as I share my screen. All right, the obligatory, can everyone see that okay? Just a quick thumbs up or thumbs down. Okay, amazing. Thank you for your feedback. So I'll go ahead and kick it to Michelle. Apologies, we're starting off on the wrong slide here. All right, Michelle, take it away.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Michelle Gilbert, and I'm a lawyer at Lawyers Committee for Better Housing. And I'm going to spend a big chunk of time in talking about evictions and how to prevent evictions. And then I'll talk about some other tenants' rights issues as well. But I really feel like evictions is the topic that is on everyone's mind right now. And I'm very pleased to be partnering with our colleagues at Uptown People's Law Center, which will be doing this presentation in Spanish tomorrow. So we'll move on to the slides. So first, to set a little ground information, eviction kind of means different things to different people. And that's because it's a process. So there are really 4 steps in the eviction process. It starts with the landlord giving the tenant a notice. And then once the landlord is given the notice, the landlord can file a case in court. Then once that case is filed, then the tenant can go to court. Both sides present their side of the story, and a judge enters an order. And then the 4th step is the enforcement, and only the sheriff can enforce an eviction order. This is important to know because when we talk about preventing evictions, what are we talking about? And it's very important to me that I want to try to prevent evictions from being filed. So right there, prevent the landlord from giving the notice, or prevent the landlord from filing the case in court. Because even when we don't get all the way to enforcement, just having an eviction filed, it has a negative effect on the tenant. So as you probably know, our governor has entered an eviction moratorium. It actually was one of the best eviction moratoria in the country, from April to November. And there was a change in November. And so when I say that the eviction moratorium now stops some steps for some people, the goal of this presentation is to share how to be one of those people for whom the eviction moratorium protects. This moratorium is in effect until March 6th. I shouldn't really try to predict political things, but I would say that I think that it's likely that it'll be continued. Okay, so again, we want to protect people from the at the first stage, and handled correctly, the governor's moratorium can protect people from even getting a notice of eviction. Next slide. So what do you do to protect yourself from even getting a notice of eviction? The landlord is required under the governor's moratorium to give every tenant a blank declaration form. If the tenant returns the declaration form to the landlord, then the landlord can't even provide a 5-day notice. So timely returning the declaration form stops even before step 1. So what is a declaration? And I swear, I have said the word declaration more in the last 6 months than I did in the first 59 years of my life. So a declaration is, in this context, is the document is going to be sworn under penalty of perjury. And that's really important. I mean, this doesn't work if these things aren't true for you. And if you're like that person that the real estate industry lobbyists are always talking about, who's just lying and not really losing money, then really don't do a declaration, because you'll probably get yourself in trouble later on. But if these things are true, then you can do a declaration that your income is below $99,000. I don't think that that's a big problem for many of us. That you have suffered COVID-related financial loss. You don't have to have had COVID, but your job was eliminated, or you had to quit your job to stay home with your kids. And it doesn't have to be that your income went to zero. Maybe you had the kind of job where you lost hours or you lost shifts, but you had financial loss so that you can't pay your rent. You've attempted to make partial payments, and here this doesn't mean that if you have zero income, then you don't have to make partial payments. You just have to make a good faith attempt. You know, again, each of these elements of the declaration are trying to get at this kind of straw man created by the real estate industry, that there are folks sitting home, tons of money, just not paying the landlord. And then the fourth element is that you would likely become homeless, which includes being doubled up with somebody. So again, you have your vacation home in Wisconsin, don't do a declaration. But if you're like many people, you've lost income, you've tried to pay the landlord, but you can't pay all of your rent, you likely would become homeless, then you can do a declaration. Okay, next slide. So that slide was the hard part that I talked about it. Here is the easy part. You don't have to wait for your landlord. Yes, it has to be all 4 things. You don't have to wait for your landlord to give you a blank declaration. You can go to this website, rentervention.com. You'll see this very cute little pink robot, and you can just click right through it. The declaration form itself is, in my sense, kind of written in a very legalistic way, and I'm a lawyer. And so it's a little scary for people who don't normally deal in legal documents, but Rentervention will get you through it. Okay. It also will it'll email you the declaration. You can email it to the landlord, because you not only want to give it to the landlord, you want to be able to prove that you've given it to the landlord. Lawyers always want you to copy things and save copies, and an email history will be very helpful. Okay. Next slide. So someone already asked, do all four things need to be true? And yes, they do. But here's the important thing to remember. It's not just a matter if they're true. You could literally be in the hospital right now with COVID, not able to pay your rent, and the landlord could file an eviction if you haven't given a declaration. So it is that piece of paper that stops the eviction. Not, oh, well, of course I have COVID. I have lost my job. I mentioned it to my landlord. I texted him, I've lost my job. What matters is the declaration. And that's why we put it in Rentervention, to make it easy for people to do. Okay. There are other kinds of evictions, say for lease violations other than owing rent. You got a dog, a nice dog. Or next slide. What about evictions if your lease just ran out? Like your lease expired in November, but you haven't been able to move. Under the Illinois moratorium, the landlord can't file an eviction in either of those circumstances unless, next slide, unless you cause a health and safety risk. Now, what does that mean exactly? It's not really defined in the eviction moratorium. I have seen some cases where I say, oh yeah, health and safety risk, we're not taking that case, criminal or, police reports, kind of bad situation. But then of course I've seen other cases where, it seemed like it was just a way to try to get around evicting someone. And that's the kind of case we take. But it should be something pretty serious to be a health and safety risk. That's why I use the example of the good dog, more than just having a good dog. Okay. So then the other thing that I want to let people know, next slide. So remember, 4 steps to the eviction process. The last is the sheriff actually coming out, putting people's stuff out. They don't actually move your stuff out anymore. They just change the locks. But that last step where people are actually turned out onto the street, the governor's moratorium prevents that. No one has been forcibly evicted in Cook County since last March, unless, again, the same language, next slide, you're a health and safety risk. So, people having wild parties all hours of the night with the police having to come out, bothering their neighbors, having parties where people aren't wearing masks, those folks can be evicted. But people who are just, unable to pay their rent, none of them have been put out. Okay, next slide. If you're in this situation, Cook County, and by this I mean all of Cook County, the city of Chicago, and suburban Cook, has created a Cook County Legal Aid for Housing and Debt program that you can call or apply online. And most important about the Cook County program, next slide, is that folks who end up in court don't go to the Daily Center anymore. They're on Zoom court, just like we're doing right now. Starting today, there is a program called the Early Resolution Program. If you know someone who ends up getting eviction court papers, they should go to court. And when they're given the opportunity, they say to the judge, don't start explaining anything. Just say, I want to talk to one of the free attorneys. And they will send you in Zoom to talk to an attorney who will be able to give you advice and hopefully help you. And I really want to say this to everyone I can, any meeting where, I can get 4 people in a room. that people shouldn't feel like, oh no, these are free attorneys. I don't want a free attorney, trust me. If you are in eviction court, you really want me. This is exactly what I do every day. You know, the guy on the corner who writes wills and blah, blah, blah. You may think, oh, well, I'm going to pay him. He must be a better attorney. But no, you want legal aid. Okay, next slide. As I said, I was going to talk a lot about eviction because that's what keeps me up every night. I know that there are lots of issues with people having conditions. Obviously, we've just gone through one of the worst, stretches of weather, and so we've got folks who are not having enough heat. The first thing that I would recommend for folks to do, if you live in the city of Chicago, to call 311. And not only, you're doing that for two reasons. One is to get a Department of Buildings, the city enforces the city code, get somebody to come out. But not only that, they're also preparing a record and kind of helping me by getting you some evidence, and the official evidence is much better than you just saying like, oh, my place is too cold. That's not a very good case. Having the city come out and say the temperature here, next slide, gives you some information about temperature. The city coming out and saying, oh, well, it's really only 56 degrees, that's good evidence. Okay, I want to go quickly through the next two slides. I know I spent a lot of time on declarations, but it's super important to me right now. There have been, in the last couple of years, some pretty good changes in the law in Illinois about immigration status. Although it's not protected by federal law, it is covered by Illinois law. And if people are worried about discrimination on the basis of immigration status, there are fair housing agencies that they could call, or in Chicago, you can call the City Commission on Human Rights. I think that there's one more slide on immigration, and then, oh yes, this is the Illinois law that I was talking about, the recent law, the Immigrant Tenant Protection Act, also provides a defense in eviction cases. So people who have concerns like that can call legal aid, the City Commission on Human Relations, or a fair housing organization. Okay, and then I will pass it back to Ellie, and I look forward to answering your questions in a little.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I am going to stop sharing my screen for a second because I've been alerted to the fact that we're having some issues with our closed captions, and I think that that might have something to do with the way I'm sharing my screen. So bear with me for a sec and let Michelle's presentation marinate. If you've got any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Let's try that again. All right, so next up we have Erin from the Chicago Department of Housing. Again, everyone can see that okay? Amazing. All right, Erin, take it away.
Hello all, and thank you for having me. There will be some mirrors between my presentation and Michelle, which is good. And it's because this Department of Housing works closely with the Lawyers Committee of Better Housing to ensure that we're going through this together. But next slide, please. Great, so here's my quick agenda of what I'm going to cover. I'm going to cover the moratorium less than Michelle, introduce what DOH is, talk about your rights as a tenant during this time. I'll also talk about illegal lockouts and what your rights are during that time, how to access court, and the intergovernmental coordination we're doing for the department, and then just talk a little bit briefly about what we have on the emergency rental assistance. All right, next please. So what the Department of Housing is, we seek to create a Chicago where all residents have safe, quality, affordable housing in the community of their choice. In DOH, we create policies and programs which aim to correct for past injustices caused by government and ensure that there is equitable distribution of resources across community. So we are a relatively new department. We're around 2 years old. And we do our work partnering with CHA, the Department of Family Support Services, the Chicago Low Income Housing Trust Fund, the Chicago Community Land Trust, and several other community-based organizations throughout the city to ensure that housing security is available for all income types. So as Michelle mentioned, and I won't go too deeply into this, the federal moratorium is extended through March 31st. The state moratorium continues to be extended around every 30 days. And you must qualify for all of these 4 pieces here. The resource we offer is Rentervention. It is a great resource for people to use. So I will stress that what Michelle brought up in her presentation. Go to that website. You must have that declaration. I'm going to stress that even more to be covered. And again, the only evictions that are allowed are the health and safety ones that are carried out through the Cook County Sheriff's Department. So if you are faced with an eviction, we as a Department of Housing have been working closely with Cook County and the courts to make sure people have access to Zoom court proceedings. So making sure that that's accessible to people regardless of their technology that they may personally have, with working with community-based organizations, working with the courts to lift that issue up, recording with the mayor's office and the Department of Family Support Services on this work. We're also collaborating with the Chicago Police Department to ensure that residents are protected during illegal lockouts. That is working with LCBH, Metropolitan Tenants Organization, to provide guidance to police officers, and working closely with the department itself to provide guidance to police officers on how they should respond in this case. We also are working with Chicago Public Schools and their engagement staff to let them know about how to talk with parents, for them to know what their housing rights and resources are. Next slide, please. So knowing your rights. So if you go to chicago.gov/eviction, we have a large amount of resources there that cover your just general renter's rights, but also right now during the crisis that we're experiencing right now. So here's a copy of the poster that we will be sharing on CTA, Chicago Public Libraries, Chicago Public Schools, with older people's offices throughout the city, and community-based organizations. So it covers Rentervention. Again, that is the one we lift up. If you're experiencing an issue, the Center for Conflict Resolution, and again, our general website for more encompassing renters' rights. And just gonna stay here for 1 minute to talk about illegal lockouts for 1 moment. So one thing that we have been hearing about are landlords who are not going through the legal eviction process, but are changing the locks or cutting off utilities for people. That is an illegal act. That is not allowed. It has been against the law, not just during COVID, but prior to COVID. So if you are experiencing this issue, if your landlord is present, please call 911. If your landlord is not present, you can call 311 and they will help get the appropriate reports and people engaged in this process. If the police come, what you want to have, if you have a lease and you have that available, that is okay, and that'll be great to have. You do not have to have a lease to be covered on this. Month to month does count. But if you have that, that would be great and have to have. If you have your landlord's contact information, that also be great to have, how the police or others can follow up with your landlord for this action. Citizenship status, as Michelle pointed out, does not impact any of this, and you should not be asked that. You are covered regardless of your citizenship status in this country. So those are the things I really want to highlight there. And if the police are there, what you need to get is a miscellaneous incident report. That is key for your evidence to show that your landlord has done this illegal act against you. Which I will say, again, is these are illegal acts. And again, we are coordinating with the police department so they know how to respond in these instances. and again, providing the rent intervention and the other resources available to you. Next slide, please. So, emergency rental assistance, as I'm sure most of us are very interested about, and I'm sorry that I'm not gonna be able to provide too much more information on this, but we do know Congress has passed $80 million for the city of Chicago, around $80 million in emergency rental assistance. This is up from the $2 million that happened in April and the $21 million that happened in August. This Congress did change how this support goes out, and federal regulations for how this, well, we had federal regulations, but due to the administration change, they changed the regulations. So we just got those, I believe this week. So we are reviewing those and making sure that our program is in compliance with the federal law. The changes that Congress did to this rental assistance program is that it allows tenants and landlords both to apply for this. So your landlord could apply knowing that you have issues paying your rent, could apply, and you would have to agree to have this money accepted. You would get a form that would show that you did agree, but you can also apply on your own behalf. So that's what made that change. It's different from how we did before. Initially, Chicago, we provided directly to the tenants the payment, but that's what's causing us to have a little bit of delay, but we are working as fast as we can to get this out to people because we know this is a very needed resource. So again, we will be providing more information as we can, but we are working to have this out as soon as possible. Next slide, please. So thank you so much. If you all have any questions, here's our website, which is chicago.gov/housing. You can reach our email account. We do check this. It is given to staff people. Staff person does monitor this, and we do try to respond to people within 1 business day as doh@cityofchicago.org. And you can follow us on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. And we'll also be elevating more information as the resources come out. Thank you all so much. I'll pass it back to Ellie.
Thank you, Erin. I will go ahead and queue up Casey's slides. I would also like to share, I am learning that our captions are not working today. I want to apologize on City Bureau's behalf for that. We did test them out and they were working fine prior to this, but you know, things happen in live events. If you are someone who is relying on captions for this presentation, we will be following up via email if you registered for resources that will be written down. So that will definitely be provided for you. Or if you are in the Zoom or Facebook Live right now and want to ask a question in the chat, we do have folks monitoring the chat so we can write an answer for you. So apologies again, there are a couple options to still make sure you get this information. And I will go ahead and pass it to Casey now to talk a little bit about the organizing side of housing.
Awesome. Thanks, Ellie. Yeah, I'm Casey. I'm a volunteer organizer with Chicago Tenants Movement. I'm going to be saying a little bit about CTM and what we do, and then a little bit about tenant organizing and how you can get started organizing in your building. Next slide, please. So CTM is a rather new organization. We're a coalition of a bunch of different housing justice groups and organizations and mutual aid networks, and really just your neighbors and organizers and people who are trying to help each other throughout this housing crisis. There's 2 different main things that CTM tries to tackle. One is our hotline and community response. This is how we try to help tenants in crisis, no matter what that crisis looks like. So if that is an illegal lockout, which Erin just went over, you can call our hotline and we will be able to get out in person and help you. And also, if you receive an eviction notice, you can call our hotline and we can help you, guide you through the eviction process. We can connect you with legal aid. We can help you through the rent intervention form, a bunch of different things our hotline operators can help you with. Secondly is our organizing campaign support. This will come into play if you enjoy our presentation here and you want to get started organizing. We can connect you with organizers who are doing the exact same thing in your neighborhood, and you can talk about how you're organizing your buildings, what next steps you need to pursue, and really just be supported by a community of organizers doing the same thing. Yeah, next slide. So what is organizing? So I have two different definitions here. Organizing is really just convincing your neighbors and networks of support to act together and negotiate and achieve your demands. So, you know, the more people you have behind one set of demands, all pursuing the same thing within a building, or whether it's across a property manager, you have many buildings, you know, organizing is the way to go, because we're more likely to get our demands met when we are approaching the landlord collectively versus as individuals. And solidarity is the key, and that really just means having each other's backs. I would describe a tenant union as a solidarity network between neighbors, and that's really it. Next slide. We're going to look at an example of a tenants union. So Leland Tenants Union was started back in May, and it was a 7-flat building, 7-unit building that had everyone in the building was given 30-day notices. You can go to the next slide, Ellie. Thank you. Yes. So yeah, everyone was given 30-day notices, and within a couple of weeks of all the tenants receiving eviction notices, this was after a developer bought the building, and they really just wanted to remodel it and hike up the rent and get new tenants in there. All of these tenants came together and said, you know, we're not going to stand for this. We deserve to live in our own houses all the way up until the lease is through, and we deserve a lease extension if we would like that. So they started meeting together. They reached out to ATU, Autonomous Tenants Union, and MTO. They were able to basically form the Leland's Autonomous Tenants Union, and then through a series of escalation and different social media call-ins, and yeah, basically starting this campaign around the 30-day notices, they were able to win a year lease extension for anyone who wanted it at the original rent, without the new developers hiking up the price, and also won rent forgiveness for the 4 months of rent that they did not pay after receiving the 30-day notices. So just a really great example of what a tenant union can do. So again, the reason why you might want to start a tenant union in your building, or just talking to your neighbors really, is just that when you are bargaining with the landlord, it is way easier for you guys to get your demands met collectively than if you were going up there individually. Your landlord is able to single things out, is able to say, no, that's not my responsibility, or no, you know, I'm not required to do that, even if they are under the RLTO. And, you know, if you have the solidarity of your neighbors behind your back, if you are all going to not pay rent, if, you know, say the elevator doesn't get fixed, or say you don't get a rent reduction, then that's something that they want to negotiate with you then, because they want some of your rent, not none of your rent. So next slide, please. All right, so steps to forming your own tenants union. So if this sounds appealing to you, I would say first step is to reach out to your neighbors. Just talk to them. You know, it sounds like an easy step, and it's really just the first thing you need to do. I would say start with the people you know. So if you have, you know, if you're on talking terms with the person across the hall from you, start there first. Have a conversation with them. See where they're at with, you know, maintenance issues in their unit, and really just listen to what they're telling you, whether it's about their own unit, about something with the building, the infrastructure of the building, if it's about how the landlord is talking to them, listen to what they're saying. When I was first reaching out to my neighbors, I am a part of Eviction Tenants Union, so I've also been organizing under my building. The first thing that I did when I reached out to my neighbors, I was personally having electricity issues. So I said, you know, I slipped notes under people's doors. I knocked doors. I, would recommend wearing a mask. I also wore gloves. I would recommend that during COVID if you're able to go knocking on people's doors. And I just said, hey, I'm your new neighbor. I have electricity issues. I can't turn my lights on in half my rooms. Are you having the same problem? And that was a really easy way to get my foot in the door to start those conversations with people. And then from there, you can just listen to everything that people are saying with their problems with their unit. Once you have had a couple of conversations with people, you can start forming your own tenants unit. You just have to have your first meeting. Once you have a meeting, you can start to identify some of these demands. Once you're providing a space for everyone to talk about what they need and what they're entitled to as renters, as tenants, you can start identifying some of your demands, identifying, what are people willing to risk to get these demands met, and then begin writing a letter. The letter is very important. This is the thing that is going to open the line of communication between you and your landlord. This is the first step to getting the landlord to communicate with your union as a collective group instead of just individual tenants. So next. And then once you've submitted that letter, you've made your demands known, you need to build and maintain your union. This can look like a lot of different things. For Leland's tenant union, this meant they had to escalate. They had to put the pressure on the new developers to let them know, that they're not playing. And that could look like a lot of different things. It could look like a media campaign. It could look like a call-in. A bunch of different things. But eventually, winning those demands is on the horizon. So next slide. Yes. So we're going to talk a little bit about risks and opportunities of tenant organizing. Tenant organizing is just one way that you can get your needs met, and there are some risks with it. So first of all, retaliation is illegal, but it is also possible. Even though your landlord is not supposed to retaliate against you, and you literally have the right to organize under the RLTO, they can retaliate against you in a number of different ways, whether this is giving you a 30-day notice, 5-day notice, 10-day notice, if it's not responding to maintenance issues in time, if it is hiking up your rent without telling you, whatever it may be, landlords do try to retaliate. Again, eviction filings can affect your credit, but with the moratorium, with everything, it's really hard to get an eviction to go through as a legal process these days, unless it's a health and safety threat, and organizing is not a threat to anyone's health or safety. So, yeah. And then lastly, winning agreement is not guaranteed, and the process is difficult. That is true. It is a very long, drawn-out process, but it is ultimately very rewarding. And there are organizations like ATU, like CTM, where we are providing these spaces for tenants, for our neighbors to come together and talk about their difficulties, talk together about what are you struggling with, why isn't your landlord responding, or why can't you connect with as many neighbors? We're here to help you as much as we can with that process. And then as far as opportunities go, honestly, almost endless opportunities when it comes to organizing. First of all, forming the tenants unit, organizing in general, provides you with legal protection. You are legally entitled to be able to organize, to talk to your neighbors, protected under the RLTO, and your landlord has to respect that right that you have. Again, you have leverage. Your landlord wants some of your rent, none of your rent. So they're going to want to negotiate with you. Especially if you're in coordination with a bunch of your neighbors. And then lastly, people have won before, even without the moratorium. So there is a history of tenant organizing in Chicago, and it's really being revived in this pandemic, and with shining examples like the Leland's Tenant Union. Next slide. All right, and then Ellie, feel free to click through all of these. But what can you win? Lease extensions, pest removal, free laundry, more time to move out, maintenance and cleaning, especially rent forgiveness. If you are behind on rent in any way, because of COVID, I bet that some of your neighbors are as well. With as many people as there are on unemployment these days, it is like statistically very likely that someone else in your building is also in the same spot as you. So you are able to win a bunch of these things. We actually just had North Spalding Renters Association. They're in the Northwest hub of CTM. They just won free laundry for a bunch of their tenants. As far as like maintenance and cleaning, right now the Northeast hub of CTM is working with Hunter Properties Tenants Union. They are in one building, their elevator is broken, so they are going to launch a campaign to win back accessibility for their building. So yeah, basically anything that you and your neighbors want, that you feel you're entitled to, you can win it. Yeah, so next slide. So you want to organize. This sounds appealing to you. Contact CTM. We're here to help. Call our hotline. We can put you in touch with an organizer. We can also put you in touch if you're in crisis, if you're experiencing a lockout. Any of those things, we can connect you to the support that you need. Feel free to email us as well with the email on the screen, chicagotenantsmovement@gmail.com. That's really it. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey, so much for that presentation. I will give everyone a moment now as we transition to the Q&A portion of the evening to think about any questions you may have. I do want to preface before we break into questions by saying that as much as this evening is about connecting tenants to resources that they need, it is about us as journalists to learn what information needs out there exist, and also for every one of our presenters to learn more about the needs of tenants and any issues, thoughts, concerns that are coming up. So if you do have, one last thing on that note, someone a long time ago described the public newsroom as putting the power back into the hands of the question asker. And so that is an ethos I would love for this evening to embody, and seeing some nods. So I think that sounds good to other folks too. So we'll start the question portion. If you do have a question, feel free to either unmute yourself and just ask out loud. Or if you'd like, I see there's a question in the chat already. You can also just drop questions in the chat and I will elevate them. Does anyone have a question that they would like to ask out loud to kick us off?
Elliot, I saw Ms. Lane's question in the chat, and I just want to caution people, it would be better to ask more general questions. I do think, Ms. Lane, based on some of the things that you've said, that you do need to talk to an attorney. And because it's a subsidized property, I would actually refer you to Legal Aid Chicago, and I can put that intake number in the chat as well. But I think this is not a good forum to have like an attorney-client communication. So rather than getting too in-depth into like a personal, I mean, not a problem with sharing, but it's just not a good venue for having an attorney-client communication.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to push back on that just a little bit by saying I think specificity is great. We are here to answer folks' direct questions, but I do appreciate the disclaimer about a legal conversation. I am not in a position to offer legal advice, so I will give that disclaimer, but I do want to say, your specific questions are the reason that we are here. So, and Casey, sorry, I think you had an answer as well.
Yeah, absolutely. This sounds like a really terrible landlord. I've actually dealt with this as well in one of my neighbors in my tenants union also had to break their lease early because they became disabled and were not able to live in their building. And the landlord was trying to get them to pay 3 months of rent, that is illegal under the ADA. You are able to break your lease early, especially if you have a doctor's note saying that you can't live in an apartment like that. So if you, again, call our, I'm just going to say call our hotline, the CTM hotline. I can put that number back down in the chat as well. We can connect you to an organizer who would love to talk to you about starting a campaign in your building, especially too if they're treating all of your neighbors, like trash as well. That sounds like a terrible time. So we can absolutely help you out with that.
Okay, thank you very much.
What I could say, I was to speak generally, while the Department of Housing does not do housing inspections, the Department of Building does to make sure that it is, up to building codes. So I would suggest calling 311 for them to work with that.
I have done all three of those things, but thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Got it. And just for our Facebook Live viewers, a little bit of background. The question is about finding a mole in the apartment and having a landlord who is resistant to fixing that.
Ellie, can I also just offer one more resource as well? I'm over at Center for Conflict Resolution, and so we've been working with LCBH and some other places. But if you think that your landlord would be interested in having a conversation, mediation, I can provide you more information about that. So it's a completely voluntary and free process. But if you think that the landlord is willing to sit down with you and find a solution, we'd be happy to help out.
I have a question. Oh, sorry.
I'll chat you information.
Okay, I have a question. So according to what I learned today, I needed to get or return a declaration page to the landlord after receiving this 5-day notice, correct? Okay, since I did not do that, can the lawyer file that eviction letter?
So there's no time frame spelled out in the governor's executive order.
Okay.
And so if so we're saying day one, the landlord gives the blank declaration, and then the landlord has to wait 5 days. If the landlord doesn't get the declaration back, the landlord can then give a 5-day notice and has to wait 5 more days to file a court case.
Okay,
So,
I was never given a declaration though. I was given a 5-day notice letter, and then her lawyer contacted me saying that he was going to file an eviction letter.
yeah, I would do a declaration immediately.
Okay.
As soon as you hang up, go to Rentervention. It really is easy to get through. It really is like you click about 6 pink boxes and and then you put in your email address and it will get you a declaration. And then, and especially if you have the landlord's attorney's email address, maybe not, if you have a phone number. And again, like anything a lawyer is going to tell you, I'm going to say not only do it, but make sure you keep a copy. If you send an email, save the email, because it's not just what's true, it matters what you can prove.
Okay.
If the landlord or the landlord's attorney gets the declaration before they file a case, they should be prevented from filing the case. If they file the case anyway, then you still want the declaration because it could stop the case from going forward.
Okay, got it. Okay, now as far as rent, I'm behind. This month I'll be behind again, unfortunately. Should I still provide any payments? I send payments to QuickPay. Not the best option. Now I see why. Regret it. But going on forward, should I make payments through check or cashier's check, or how would you guys advise me to go forward on paying partial rent?
I would say that probably if the landlord has gone so far as to get an attorney, the landlord probably doesn't want to accept more rent because they don't want to be in a situation where they're actually under the Chicago landlord-tenant ordinance. If they accept late rent, it could mean that they can't file the case.
Okay.
You are right. If you think that there's going to be a problem with your landlord, it's always best to do everything in a way that you can document it. I mean, the Chase Pay is good because I'm not sure if that's what you said, but like electronic payment is good because you can get those records from your bank account that you made the payments.
Right.
I mean, and otherwise I would just hold any rent, and I know this is really tough to say. I'm not being insensitive because I know that folks have lots of expenses, but like actually hold it back in a way, maybe get a money order and put the money order away, because that's not only like a way to save it, but it's proof that you attempted to pay.
Got it. Okay. All right. Thank you.
We're getting a question. Thank you for that question, Maite. We're getting a question from Facebook. Justin, thank you for reposting it in the chat here. What rights do tenants have generally if their building is sold and landlords change? Does the lease/original agreement have to be upheld?
So if there's actually a lease, then a subsequent owner purchases the property subject to that lease. So the lease continues on, that exact lease. If or when the lease expires, the landlord isn't required to renew it. We think that the landlord should be required to renew it and would support changes like that to City of Chicago law, but under the law now, the landlord isn't required to renew a lease. The City of Chicago security deposit law is pretty good, that the old landlord and the new landlord are both responsible for your security deposit. The old landlord can't just say, oh no, I sold the building. There are also some good rules about how the new landlord has to give notice that they are the new landlord. Notice of who the agent is, if it's somebody in California buys the property, but they have a local agent or property management, they're required under the ordinance to give notice of that.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear exactly. So it's in regards to the deposit. So does the deposit continue as well?
Yes, the security deposit continues.
Okay.
And even if the old landlord doesn't give it to the new landlord is still responsible for it.
Got it. Thank you.
Any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and just ask. No need to wait for me to queue you up.
I have a question. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, perfect. So I've lived in my apartment for 18 months, and it was only last month so the apartment was delivered to me with no hot water in the bathroom sink and minimal hot water coming out of the kitchen sink. They only fixed it last month after multiple requests. And so now I'm kind of, I want to get some kind of, I don't know what to call it, but like money back because, I didn't have hot water. This is obviously super illegal to not have a very basic utility. I guess like what would be the best approach for me to take to kind of get that money back? What do I do if they say no? Like, what kind of steps does anyone advise I take?
Yeah, I can chime in here. So you said that they already fixed the problem. They already gave you hot water. It's fixed now.
Yeah, it's fixed now. It was January 20th, so I've had hot water for about a month.
Okay. I know that you're able to do submit a thing called a 14-day rent reduction letter if you are lacking an essential service or lacking some kind of maintenance of your unit, which basically says, it's a declaration that says, I am not going to pay my full amount of rent. I am going to take like $200 off of rent because that is like what I believe, this water is worth that much because you're not upkeeping it. But that is, I'm pretty sure you can only do that like when the service itself like needs repairing. So the fact that it's already repaired now, because I tried to do the same thing for my electricity and I waited too long. I would say if it's something that affected your entire building, which I assume it was, not just your own unit, you could rally your neighbors together. I'm sure they would want rent payment as well. And it's basically as simple as getting all your neighbors together saying, hey, this was illegal for a very long time. And we are not going to pay full rent for, how many ever months you guys agree on. And we've seen that work before too, as well. So does that make sense?
It does. I do think that it was just in my unit though, because so it's hard to explain what was wrong with it without having a visual. But so when I turned the hot water tap on, nothing came out. And it was because the hot water was completely off, like under the sink, which I could turn on, but then it wouldn't turn off. So I didn't really have like reasonable access to it, if that makes sense. Like I would have to crawl under my sink, turn on the hot water, wash my hands, turn it off under the sink, or leave it running 24/7, which I obviously don't want to do.
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think a 14-day notice works in that time, unless maybe Michelle, who's a lawyer, wants to tell me I'm wrong. But
no, I think that either the rent withholding to try to affect the change or the rent withholding due to the diminution in value, or those are really your choices. You can do the 14-day letter. And in fact, hot water is pretty important. I think you could probably even do a shorter than a 14-day letter. I really like to wash my dishes in very hot water, so I'm very sympathetic to this concern. You could have done a 72-hour letter and then withheld, possibly even withheld, this would be I would think like a relatively minor repair, like under $500 or half of rent. And you could have gotten a plumber in to fix it. And it's a lot, you have to get like a real plumber and save your receipts and all of that stuff. You can pay your rent to the plumber. None of these things I'm saying right now are going to help you though, because it's already been fixed. There would be some plaintiffs' side landlords who might take the case. You could you could make a demand and just tell the landlord what you're going to do, that you're going to withhold rent now because, look, you've got this fixed, but I was inconvenienced for such a long time. And then you can kind of see whether the landlord is going to act on it. Like was said before, the landlord might, acknowledge like, oh, I did a wrong thing. I left it not be fixed for a while. So I'm going to agree with her. I'm going to let her do that rent deduction. Or, some rent is better than no rent, and they may have, a bunch of other tenants who are not paying any rent. So they're not going to worry about you having withheld, $100 a month for 4 months or something. So And I'd say that there might be some plaintiff side attorneys who might do it. I mean, you could also file a small claims case. In addition, rent-intervention might have some documents that would help. Rent-intervention is more like geared towards the 14-hour or 14-day letter. There's also a website called Illinois Legal Aid Online. I'll put that website in the chat for a moment. And that really helps you produce court documents. Like if you're good with computers, if you try, just negotiating with your landlord, same way that you would with Macy's. If you bought a dress and took it home and the zipper broke the next day, you might take it back and say, I want my money back, whatever. Try that same kind of negotiating with your landlord. You could file a small claims case.
Okay.
Carrie, does that help answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, it does. Because I've just kind of been like, I don't even know what to do. Like if I type up a list of grievances on a request for reimbursement, like does that do anything? But I guess that yes is pretty much the answer that I've gotten, that it at least starts the negotiation process and we can, get somewhere from there.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for your question. I have two in the chat queue here. I'm going to ask the most recent one because it relates to this. So HUD pays most of your rent. Can you still withhold your portion of the rent?
So I'm gonna bring into the Zoom my mother a little bit, who worked in a public housing development in Peoria for a couple decades. And she would call me and she would want to know, well, what's the legal answer? Or I would say something and then she would say, well, that's a legal answer. What's the real answer? So the legal answer is that subsidized housing tenants have equal rights to withhold rent. The problem is, though, the real world answer is you have to be careful about that, because there's a risk not only of losing housing and being evicted, which is a terrible thing, but also losing the subsidy. And so that's why I would follow some of these ideas. I also, there's a number that you can call, two things I'll point out. There's a number that you can call to a HUD center that does inspections. I know it's hard to believe, but HUD buildings have a special inspection process, not just 311, but they're also periodically inspected through HUD. I mean, I have found some truly terrible HUD funded housing though. But on the other thing, HUD tenants have even more rights to organize than non-subsidized tenants. The building has to let you hold meetings in a public area, if there's like a social room or something. And so, I would, again, I'm going to go back to where I was kind of at the top of that comment, that you want to be careful because it's not just a matter of eviction, but a matter of losing the subsidy. And so I would recommend trying to check in with Legal Aid Chicago, because it's kind of how LCBH, where I work now, is more likely to represent tenants in the private market, where Legal Aid Chicago, where I actually worked for 30 years, represents subsidized tenants. So that's why I would check in there, just to make sure that you're doing it right.
We've got a question from the Facebook Live crowd, specifically for the Department of Housing. In my experience volunteering for the Chicago Tenants Movement hotline, neither 311 nor the cops have been able to help with illegal lockouts with the urgency it deserves. The majority of the time, cops say it's a civil matter, no matter what proof you show them. So number one, what are you doing to address this? And two, what can residents who are uncomfortable calling the police do to get let back in?
Yeah, I will take them each time. So number one, what are we doing to address this? So we have made a video with MTO and LCBH and the deputy of the police department to provide guidance that has been shown to all of the police officers over every day, I think for over a week, to know how to correctly respond to this issue. We are continually having conversations with the police department to ensure that the information is being shared with all the police officers. There are a lot of police officers in our city, so unfortunately this is taking a while to disseminate with them. We have worked with 311 to provide training to their operators. We receive updates from them, I believe on a weekly or monthly basis on what's going on with lockouts. And we are having that conversation with the 911 operators as well. We are aware this issue is still happening though, and we are continually having our conversations to make sure that people are being treated appropriately. Like I said, the miscellaneous incident report is important to ask for and important to share that with them. And for number two, I understand why many people would be not feeling comfortable with calling the police officers to help them get back into their apartment. Again, it is an illegal action that the police are supposed to be enforcing if the landlord is present. I would also say reaching out to your ward office for your city council representative during that time is also a ally in this. We have also shared that same guidance with all 50 alder people across the city and what they could do to help support if that's an issue going on. So I'd recommend also calling your city council representative if you're going through a lockout at that time. They also can typically have relationships with the police officers in their area and may be able to help negotiate things in that time.
Following up on that, actually, Casey, I'd be curious to hear if, Chicago Tenants Movement has ever dealt with lockouts and maybe what that has looked like.
Yeah, absolutely. Our hotline is made for illegal lockouts. It is made for people who do not want to call the police or the police are not responding in the way that they need to. Same, 311, or even if your alderman is not there in a timely manner, we are able to help you, especially for lockouts specifically. We have a team of core responders that are trained to specifically respond to tenants in crisis, to be able to talk them through what they're experiencing, see exactly what needs to be done. If we need to get people out on the ground to break them back into their building, then we can start doing that. It is made for that, and it can really range from something as someone in crisis, as experiencing an illegal lockout or having their utilities shut off, whatever, or if you just want to get connected with an organizer, our hotline is made for all of those things, everything in between. So yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions from folks? We are about 5 minutes from wrapping up for the evening, so if you've been waiting to ask your question, now is your time.
I have a question for Casey, really. If you rent from a landlord who only has like a few units or a few people renting from them, I would imagine that would kind of change the math a little bit on your ability to organize fellow renters in order to kind of, add a little extra weight to your requests of this landlord. Like, do you have any tips for how those kinds of renters should try and organize? Are there mechanisms in place that can help them in lieu of like fellow renters, or what do you think would be the move there?
Yes, you're talking about like smaller landlords if it's not like huge property owners. Right. Yeah. So, I mean, recently we've had a tenants. It wasn't even like a tenants union. Even they didn't really even have to establish that, but it was just 4 units. And it was 4 units. The landlord lived in one of the units, and then it was 3 other people who were getting lease non-renewals, and they wanted to live in their housing. They had lived in their housing. They had lived in that place for a long time. Oftentimes, it's almost easier to organize in smaller buildings like that because you're able to get in contact with every single person, because you're able to stand out in the backyard, with face masks, of course, but, you're able to see people in person. Whereas, my landlord or my management property owns 44 buildings across the city of Chicago. And Lord knows I have tried to canvass, at least like 10 of them, but that's hard. So I actually would say that it is easier to run campaigns in smaller buildings because you're able to get in touch with more tenants. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, thanks.
We've got a question in the chat here. I signed a contract where I agreed that in the middle of the contract, my rent will be raised by $200. The landlord's argument is that the rent is way below the neighborhood amount of rent. Is there anything I can do now if I realize that I won't be able to make that new rent amount?
I would say, I mean, if you have signed something, it's always the kind of the worst scenario because, it is a contract. But I also feel like now is a pretty good time to talk to the landlord because there are a lot of folks who aren't able to pay any or like very sporadic rent. And, someone who, if you have a good history of paying what what has been your lease amount all along and say, look, I can continue to pay this, but I can't pay this other, maybe can we revisit it in 6 months? Or, I think now is probably a better time to negotiate than normal. Because a landlord would have to be just like really a bold fool. If you've got a good tenant to say, no, he can't even get into eviction court. If you do a declaration and say that's why you can't pay the extra $200. And even if you can get into eviction court because somebody isn't paying you $200, well, you have to pay $400 to go to court. No one has been evicted in Cook County except for health and safety violations since February of 2020. You get an eviction order today, you can't enforce it because of the sheriff. You can't, God only knows really when a landlord is going to be able to enforce that eviction order. So anyone who is unwilling to deal with a tenant who's just saying, I can't pay a $200 rent increase, just seems really stupid to me. But, just hopefully that little analysis of where you have a little bit better than normal bargaining power is kind of helpful to go into the landlord. And again, referring back to my mother or my grandmother, you get more with honey than vinegar. And if you go in and politely say, I can't do this, this is what I can do, this is what I have been doing for you, can't we work this out? I talk with lots of landlords attorneys and landlord lobbyists, and they say to me, our big problem right now is that tenants aren't talking to us. So I don't know. They do say that to me all the time. So I'm going to advise trying to go in and talk to this landlord.
And just to reiterate, the Center for Conflict Resolution has a free service that can help you do that with a trained neutral third party. So if that's ever helpful, I'm going to post the information in the chat right here, and just give us a call or connect with me, and I can find a time to talk with you more offline.
Amazing.
That's also a great reason, Lucas, to contact your neighbors as well. You know, if you were asked to sign a contract, pretty likely that your neighbors are also asked to sign a contract or are also experiencing a rent hike as well. They probably have the same interests and concerns as you. So I would say it's a great time to reach out to your neighbors.
Awesome. Unfortunately, we are up on time already. That flew by personally. I can't speak for anyone else, but thank you all so much for joining us today, for your questions. Thank you to Casey, Michelle, and Aaron for your expertise and for agreeing to be in a space where, you know, you're being put together in conversation with one another and with folks. I just, before we wrap, want to mention again, if you heard anyone who had similar issues as you or had similar questions and you'd like to connect with them, we do have that public agenda linked. You can drop that info there. We are not sharing that with anyone outside of the Zoom call. And that in that same agenda, there is a link to a document called Resources and Takeaways. A lot of the things that we talked about today, the hotlines, the websites, the things that we sort of pointed out as next steps will be included there. Shout out to Justin for putting that list together for the most part. I will also drop that link in the chat again here, and I will ask Justin or Pat to drop it in the Facebook Live as well so that those viewers have access to it. Before we go, I just wanted to plug our housing reporting once again. That's available at citybureau.org/housing, and again in Spanish on the Chicago Univision website. If you do know of someone who might benefit from a session like this, but in Spanish, we are partnering with Univision tomorrow to have a forum. It will be a similar slate of presenters, someone who can speak to the legal perspective, someone who can speak to organizing, and a representative of the Department of Housing. So that'll just be on our Facebook again, facebook.com/citybureau. If you found tonight helpful, or if you didn't find tonight helpful, we'd love to hear that feedback. There's a link again in the agenda. Would love to hear your thoughts on how, if this served any of your information needs. And before we wrap, I just want to pass it back really quick to Aaron, Casey, Justin, or Michelle, if there's anything else you'd like to announce or highlight before we part ways. Now's your shot.
Yeah, I'll just say if you're part of any community group, your church community, Zoom makes it possible for me to pop into a meeting, talk to 15 minutes about doing declarations. I could even, you know, pull up Rentervention and show you how to click through it. I'm happy to do it. I want to see how many times I can say declaration in 2021.
Yes, again, we want to be accessible to people, so feel free to email us, follow us on social media for more information about the emergency rental assistance, especially. We'll also be working with community groups to making sure that we're getting to hard to reach people and across the city. But again, feel free to email us and reach out to your Department of Housing.
Yeah, I'll end it on talk to your neighbors, talk to your neighbors, talk to your neighbors. Absolutely reach out to your neighbors. I'm sure they're experiencing the same things that you are. And I will also extend the same thing that Michelle did, is that if you would like me to come to any type of community gathering and present about tenant organizing, or, you know, we can get someone else from CTM who is also doing organizing to give a little rundown on tenant organizing. Feel free to email us, call the hotline. Yeah, we can do that.
Awesome. Thank you again to all of our presenters and all of our attendees. Justin, I'm sorry, I wasn't sure if you wanted to give a quick plug. No. we're
It's
good.
okay. Yeah, I was just gonna say thank you everybody for coming, for your time. I know it's a very hectic time. So yeah, thank you to our panelists as well for sharing all of this.
Yeah, thank you. And once again, if you would like to access those resources, I just dropped them in the chat. I'll link it again. We'll make sure that it gets to Facebook Live as well. If you're interested in City Bureau's work, we're just at citybureau.org. And that is it for me for the evening. Thank you all so much for spending your time with us.